Is Cormac McCarthy a misogynist? Well, today we'll be exploring that idea through three of the main female McCarthy scholars, Lydia Cooper, Nell Sullivan, and Stacy Peeble. And I run a Cormac McCarthy channel, everyone. So this isn't a smear campaign on McCarthy. My answer is no to him being misogynistic. But we're going to look at this problem through the lens of some of the scholars in the community. So one of the first things that you notice after you've read McCarthy's bibliography is that women very rarely show up. But that's not all. When you look at McCarthy's landscape, they are very masculine. And the bleak naturalism that pervades McCarthy's work is masculine. Without self-reflection, very few times in McCarthy's novels we're having Proustian self-reflection. And with the absence of that, we have phenomenological action itself left. And so the absence of women and this action-oriented indifferent universe creates, as Lydia Cooper calls it, a man's world.
You're a boy in a man's world. And I'm a man who loves to play with boys.
A phallocentric reality, a fantasy of a hegemonic masculine identity that is built with heterosexual working class white men. And McCarthy doesn't make this any easier on himself because in the middle of his career, he published 5 Westerns, and Westerns are known to be very masculine and to objectify women. And Cooper asks us, and this is, I guess, a question to me, is there any purpose or good, to quote, be gained from asking students to analyze these hyper-masculine fantasies stripped of realistic or multidimensional feminine characters? And the answer, everyone, is an overwhelming yes, Lydia Cooper. We're going all the way and leaving a lot of this behind, but I'm still here to give your perspective light. And so a lot of the scholars actually see McCarthy's absence of women, of these perspectives, as a great bridge to talk about gender issues and feminism. And one of the main tactics of these scholars is to view McCarthy's male characters as taking part in performative masculinity. They'll argue that gender is performative, that, it doesn't exist, spectrum. And to counteract this, I'd like to talk about Alfonso in All the Pretty Horses. Even though that her property is run by her son-in-law and she's somewhat subjected to all this, she's the one pulling all the strings. She's one of McCarthy's more dynamic and insightful female characters. You could say maybe one of the only ones up until Alicia Western. And the gender community is not happy with McCarthy. They're not happy with themselves. Oh my God. Because guys, this is the literary criticism gets so wacky and meta. Us men, the masculine scholars, us at large, we have not focused enough effort on Alfonso. I've heard this said multiple times that the lack of critique on Alfonso and the perspectives on her show the non-equity of the Cormac McCarthy scholarly. Even worse, everybody, McCarthy just, if his job was to make these people mad, make these critics mad, he just goes all the way in such rate. He, I would say reduces women in that book to whores, to virgins, to bums, But one of the non-talked about things in a McCarthy novel, in general, is Trippin' Through the Dew, who is an androgynous, or what we would probably call a trans character today. And I think that most people avoid this because it's a controversial subject. And my interpretation of McCarthy Suttrie's relationship with Trippin' in the Dew is very positive. He's very kind and warm to Trippin' in the Dew. And that's how it should be. If you have a friend, if you have a colleague and person you run around with, it doesn't matter who they are or what they do. Their actions are what matters most. That's the right approach. There are different, divergent people, but if you've become friends with them and they help you, it doesn't matter who they are or what they're doing. And it's interesting because Lydia Cooper argues, quote, Trippin' Through the Dew stands outside the gendered paradigm that Suttrie creates and inhabits. The character is marginalized by the dominant narrative voices, yet pushes back insistently and stands, therefore, as a persistent problem for rejecting the gender binary and refusing to be relegated to the margins of interpretation. Because I would say that's a somewhat of a strong argument, because Trippin' Through the Dew is there at the start of the novel, and then I think they're the last person that Suttrie really interacts with before the novel ends. And this is very similar in The Passenger. And not really a spoiler here, but there's a trans character. And kind of at the conclusion of the novel, they have the protagonist, Bobby, and the trans character have an interaction again. And a very meaningful one at that. It's actually very reminiscent of Suttrie. And it seems to be a commentary on people who've been relegated to the margins and the fringe of society. And these are characters who McCarthy likes, just throughout his life. And being an oddball himself, these people that you encounter in El Paso at bars and in Knoxville and, on your journeys as an artist. And it's interesting that Lydia Cooper gives out surveys to her class. And, I don't know if we can trust these, but she asked, quote, Nell Sullivan claims that women in McCarthy's fiction are absent, dead, dying, or doll-like. Seems obvious and accurate. Do you agree? And quote, do you guys agree that McCarthy women are absent, dead, dying, or doll-like? I would say I could see that how that could be true up until the Stella Maris and the Passenger, because then we have just the most able brain, able and disabled, female character. But all respondents said yes, which, I don't know if she's Lydia selling us wolf tickets, because if I was in there, I would hit no just to hold it down for our boy Cormac McCarthy. Another great point. I mean, this stuff is fire, even though I'm kind of making jokes here. I mean, Lydia Cooper, Nell Sullivan, Stacey Peoples, they're smart. I mean, holy smokes, man. I get my mind blown all the time. And they argue that McCarthy's push for hyper-masculinity in his characters is always subverted by these aspects of feminism, because Judge Holden, even though he's the god of war and the devil and yada, 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 has this air of daintiness surrounding him. John Grady Cole is a very feminine man, and he is engaging in the breaking of horses, and he's a very passionate lover, and is on this very romantic journey. I mean, it's very beautiful. I mean, he's really in touch and like trying to touch that feminine aspect of his consciousness, but that's what leads to all the problems. But his pursuit into this knowledge seems to be very Genesian, in that his taste for knowledge and experience throw him out of innocence. And McCarthy is actually very angry at hypermasculinity, toxic masculinity, and because that's what our modern culture is. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and preach to you guys, but the destruction of the environment and the way we treated the land and indigenous people and whatnot in our movement across America is embarrassing. And not saying that every other culture in the world didn't do it also, but where we are now and the domination mindset that we have stemming from Christianity isn't great. And when we look at The Orchard Keeper, McCarthy is critiquing the Tennessee Valley Authority and everything that's happening there. In Child of God, McCarthy critiques this, new mental necrophiliac passions that are brewing. Same in No Country for Old Men. Obviously, the Border trilogy is a critique of the post-atomic age. I mean, we could go on and on. Blood Meridian's a critique of the conquering of the West. Suttree of the existentialist, alcoholic, hypermasculine personality. So when I view McCarthy and gender and with women and all that, that's what I see him trying to do, because McCarthy is no man's man. I mean, he likes to play pool, he drinks, but he was a socialite. He's an artist. I mean, read his lines. He is in touch with his feminine consciousness. I mean, any man who is artistic and grows up with a couple older sisters who are also artists and very influential on them, we're going to carry that with them through the rest of his life. He went to a Catholic school with nuns. And another beautiful point is when we look at McCarthy's literature and his landscapes, a lot of the time they are very infertile. If you look at Blood Meridian and The Crossing, these landscapes aren't potent, and that is because there's the lack of the feminine. The judge tells the kid at the end of Blood Meridian, quote, "This desert upon which so many have broken is vast and calls for largeness of the heart, but is also ultimately empty." And so what do we say about McCarthy's use of rape and the exploitation of underage women in his novels? You could say that he is depicting men consistently as beings who rape women, who use women, and exploit women. We have some breaks with Alejandra and Bobby Western, even though that's a kind of a weird one. But overall, this is his depiction of women. It's such an odd balance, though, because McCarthy's aesthetics are violent, are indifferent. Like, when you just look at his writing style and sentence structure, they are of this hyper-masculine King James Bible lineage. And so he's just playing with so much contrast, and it's just great. I mean, I think that's why we haven't really seen like a push to cancel McCarthy or like calls about misogyny, because when you look deep at it and you understand it, the content really isn't there. I mean, Lydia Cooper and Nell Sullivan are very into the gender studies communities. I would say that they are on the fringe edge of radicalism in that area, and they don't really see too much wrong in McCarthy's works from what I've seen. Obviously, there's a lot to critique and to talk about, but they're not really labeling him as a misogynist. That seems to be saved for like random people on Goodreads that like just do that to everybody. And to conclude, I think that all of McCarthy's tales and all of his characters shine light on things that we don't normally look at. And I think in terms of multiculturalism and diversity and growth in general as a people that are trying to come together with very different ideas of the world. That's the most important thing. So everyone, let me hear some thoughts. Let me hear some ideas. We're moving into sketchy and controversial territory, but I love it. I love it. We're going all the way. If you think this is bad, you should see the list of some of the videos I'm going to make. We're moving toward the point that if I actually had subscribers, I could get canceled. But luckily, it's just you, I, probably like 100 other people. Peace.